Chapter 7. Jesse sighed as he led Molly towards the stagecoach platform. The sun was setting, and he wanted to be home in bed, concocting scenarios of revenge. But the telegraph of a stagecoach being robbed had come in a few hours ago. Being the new deputy and the only one without family, nothing like rubbing salt in the wound. He'd been given the task of meeting the stagecoach and taking accounts from the passengers. He stiffened as he saw 3 people on the platform. Was he late? No. As he grew closer, he recognized the tall physique of James and the smaller outlines of Pauline's parents. What were they doing here? It wasn't as if he were avoiding them, but they served as a reminder of Pauline's death.
"Go home, Jesse," James said. "We don't need you here."
Jesse matched James's cool tone.
"I'm here on sheriff business, James. It's my understanding the stagecoach was robbed, and I am here to collect the details of the encounter in order to begin an investigation." "Oh, now you care about the robbers," James said snidely. "Too bad you couldn't care a few days before Pauline was killed."
Jesse took a deep breath to remain calm.
"What are you doing out this late? Is there something I can help with?" "We are here for the stagecoach," James spat. "My grandmother is on that stagecoach. Even though she's older and missed Pauline's funeral, she's making the trip over from the East Coast."
The words stung Jesse, and he narrowed his eyes at the man who was almost his brother-in-law. He had loved Pauline, and yet James was acting as if it had been Jesse's bullet that had killed her. Even if Jesse had been deputized on the day of the robbery, there was no guarantee the result would have been any different. He opened his mouth to say as much, but the look of sadness on Pauline's parents' face kept him from it. There was no need to deepen their pain to satisfy his ego. Moments later, the sound of the approaching stage drew Jesse's attention. He sat straighter in his saddle, keeping his eyes peeled for any shadiness. But he figured the robbers would not be stupid enough to rob the same stage twice. The stagecoach came to a stop in front of the station, and the driver jumped down to open the door. A nasty bruise covered his forehead, but he appeared in decent shape otherwise. Jesse noticed there was no shotgun messenger. He would have to remember to ask if they had started with one. When the coach door opened, an older woman with gray hair stepped down first, followed by a younger woman with dark locks. "Mother!" Pauline's mother croaked out through tears as she ran into the older woman's arms. "Where is your sheriff?" the younger woman asked, her eyes glancing around. When they landed on Jesse, his breath caught. They were the bluest eyes he had ever seen. "We need to discuss the robbery to which we were subjected."
"I am a deputy sheriff, miss,"
Jesse said, removing his hat as he spoke.
"I'm Deputy Jennings, and I'll be taking that account down for you."
"Good." The young woman nodded at him and turned to the driver. "Thomas, would you be opposed to a brief layover before we continue to Lisbon?"
"No, miss. I could use some rest, too, and it's dangerous to travel at night. We should wait and head out in the morning."
For the first time since the woman stepped off the coach, she appeared flustered. "But I have no money and no place to stay." "You'll stay with us," the older woman said, reaching out a hand to the younger woman. "Oh, Ellen, I could not impose," the younger began. "Nonsense," Ellen responded. "You kept your head when the attack happened and calmed me afterwards. It is only one night, but I will not hear of you staying anywhere but with us. Right, Iris?" "Sure, yes," Iris stammered. "If you helped my mother, then our house is open to you." Jesse stifled his sigh of irritation. He wanted to finish his duty and return home.
How about the three of you come with me then? I'll take your statements and you ladies can be on your way. Thomas, was it? He asked, turning to the driver. We'll get you set up with a room at the inn.
I don't think I'll be of much help, Ellen said. I was too scared to take much notice. I just remember there were 3 men. I'm sure my statement will be enough, the younger woman said. Why don't you spend some time with your family, Ellen, and I'll get this nice deputy to drop me off afterwards. That won't be a problem, will it? Though she formed the words as a question, the tone behind them was more of a command. Jesse opened his mouth to say no, but the woman batted her eyes at him and smiled ever so sweetly. Before he could utter the word, he found his head nodding against his will in response. It will be no problem, miss. He trailed off as he realized he hadn't heard her name as of yet. Whidby, Mary Catherine Whidby. James, be a good boy and grab our trunks, will you? Ellen asked sweetly, before turning her attention to Jesse. You do know where to take her after she's done giving her account, don't you? Mother, Iris hissed, glancing sharply at Jesse. This is Jesse Jennings, the man Pauline was going to marry. Ellen's eyes grew round, and her hand flew to her mouth. Oh, dear, I am so sorry. I should have realized from the name. I guess I'm still flustered from the robbery.
It's all right, ma'am, Jesse said, swallowing the knot of emotion trying to climb up his throat. But to answer your question, I do know where to take Miss Whidby. Ellen stared at him a moment longer, then nodded.
We'll see you soon, Kate, she said, turning her attention to the younger woman. As Pauline's family loaded up their wagon, Jesse threw Molly's reins around a nearby post.
If you two will come with me, the sheriff's office is just up the way.
Though Jesse led the way, he noticed that Miss Whidby stayed almost even with him in stride. Who was this woman and where had she come from? After unlocking the door, Jesse pointed to the 2 chairs in the room and grabbed some paper and a pencil from the desk. He leaned against the edge as he looked from the woman to the driver.
Let's start with you, Thomas. Can you tell me what you remember?
The man nodded.
We were traveling the path to Belleville when I came across a fallen tree. When I slowed the coach down, a man came out from behind one of the trees with a gun pointed on me. Before I could reach for my gun, 2 more appeared on horses. I guess one of them hit me with his gun, because the next thing I remember is waking up to Miss Whidby's face.
The man shot an admiring glance at the woman, who smiled but didn't appear to reciprocate the feelings.
Did you not have a shotgun messenger? Jesse asked. No, we weren't carrying a strongbox, so they sent us on without one. I don't know why they targeted us, Thomas answered.
Jesse shook his head, unsure himself.
Perhaps they were hoping for wealthy passengers, or perhaps they were just desperate. How about you, Miss Whidby? What do you remember?
The woman drew herself straighter in the chair. The coach stopped, and we heard a commotion. One of the men opened the door and ordered us outside. He wore a red cloth over his face, so all I remember were his eyes. They were blue and cold. Once outside, we saw another man on horseback. He also wore a mask and his hat low, so I couldn't see any of his face, but his right shoulder was in a sling as if he'd been injured recently. Jesse stopped scribbling and looked up at the woman.
Could it have been from a gunshot?
Miss Whidby shook her head. I can't say for sure. I don't remember blood on his arm, but I suppose it could have been from a gunshot. Why do you ask? Jesse tapped the pencil against the pad of paper. Could it be the same band of robbers?
Nothing. Keep going, please.
A third man came around the side of the coach, and the 2 on the ground took our bags, dumped our trunks, and stole our money and jewelry. Oddly, the man on horseback allowed me to keep my wedding dress.
Wedding dress?
Jesse asked. Yes, I'm supposed to be meeting my husband in Lisbon. Jesse realized he was staring at her and forced his eyes back to the paper.
All right, is there anything else you remember that you can tell me?
Miss Whidby closed her eyes for a moment, as if mentally recalling the incident. Then her lids snapped open. Yes, there was one more thing. The man on horseback had a scar on his hand. Jesse's throat went dry.
A scar, did you say? What type of scar?
Her brow furrowed. A small white one, like the sliver of a moon. Rage boiled within Jesse, and he nearly snapped the pencil in two.
Where were you when you were attacked? He asked the driver.
About an hour east of Belleville, the man said. We dropped 2 passengers off there and spoke with their deputy, who told us the robbers had hit them too.
This band was getting more dangerous every day. 3 attacks in less than 3 days? The sheriff might be content to sit and wait for them to come back, but Jesse was beginning to feel more strongly that they would have to go after the men to get them to stop.
Thank you both for your accounts, Jesse said, placing the paper and pencil back on the desk. Thomas, let's get you settled in the inn, and then I'll take you to the Mastersons, Miss Whidby.
Jesse led the way out and locked the office behind him.
The inn is run by Clark and Martha Davis, Jesse said. I think you will find them quite accommodating.
As long as it's a place to sleep, I'll be fine,
Thomas answered. The inn door was closed when they arrived, but after a few hard raps at the door, light shone out of the window. A short older woman with gray hair and kind eyes answered the door.
Hi, Martha, Jesse said. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but Thomas here is a stagecoach driver. They were robbed earlier today. He has no money to pay you, but he needs a place to stay.
Martha nodded and ushered Thomas inside. Of course I will find him a place to stay. Do you need a place too, miss? She asked, turning her attention to Miss Whidby. No, thank you. I'm staying with Ellen Baker.
She's staying with the Mastersons, Martha,
Jesse said, trying to squash the emotion threatening his voice.
But thank you.
Martha's eyes widened, and she nodded knowingly. All right. Well, you have a good night, Deputy. Jesse nodded and tipped his hat in her direction.
Well, Miss Whidby, I have no wagon. Will you be opposed to riding on my horse?
Of course not, Miss Whidby said with narrowed eyes. I am an accomplished rider.
I meant no offense, miss, Jesse said.
Though he would never say so out loud, he admired the woman's spunk.
I was more concerned with your comfort because of the forced proximity between us on horseback.
Oh, Miss Whidby dropped her eyes. Thank you for your concern, but as there is no other option, it will be fine. When they reached Molly, Jesse helped Miss Whidby onto the saddle first, before swinging up behind her. Though he tried to keep as much distance between them as possible, he couldn't help smelling the intoxicating sweet scent wafting his way. She turned slightly in the saddle so she could see him and asked, Ellen's granddaughter was your fiancée? Jesse looked away as he nodded.
Her name was Pauline, and yes, she was.
The woman opened her mouth as if to ask another question, but his cold gaze must have changed her mind, as she shut it and turned forward again. The rest of the trip to the Masterson residence occurred in silence. He pulled Molly to a stop, dismounted, and reached a hand up to help Miss Whidby down. When her feet hit the ground, she looked up at him and said, I'm sorry about your fiancé. I hope you find the men who did this. Thank you for the ride. Before he could respond, she turned on her heels and walked away. Jesse waited until she was safely in the residence before mounting Molly and steering her towards home. Her last statement rattled around in his head. Would he ever find Pauline's killers and be able to avenge her death?